one. Wait, go.
And a very warm welcome to everyone on our panel on AI and social partners. My name is Emma Nelson, and this panel is part of the 2022 OECD International Conference on AI in Work, Innovation, Productivity and Skills. It's hosted by the OECD and also supported by the German Federal Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs. Now, over the course of this week, we've had more than 70 speakers and 3,500 registered participants from more than 100 countries. So if you are joining us today, a very warm welcome, and I do hope you enjoy the next hour with us. The purpose of this week is to broaden and also to deepen the debate on the impact that artificial intelligence, AI, has on work, innovation, productivity and skills, and just as importantly, the policies that we need to make AI trustworthy, effective, and to benefit everybody. Please feel free to place comments, materials and questions in the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. As we go along today, we will be gathering questions, so please don't hold back. There have been brilliant questions so far this week, so let us know what they are. They will be transmitted to me, and then I will be passing them on and questioning our panelists in the latter half of this session. In many of the previous sessions, we've discussed the various ways that AI is changing both the nature of work and the ways of managing this change, but a bit of context and perspective for today. The impact of artificial intelligence, whether it's positive or negative, will entirely depend on how it is implemented in the workplace itself. This includes how that adoption is regulated and how much involvement there is at every single level. So today, we are focusing on social partners, such as unions or employers' organisations, and their role in both shaping policies and supporting businesses and workers as they navigate this new world. We'll be looking at two key aspects to start off with. First off, that of the all-important collective agreement. And secondly, we'll look at the tools that are now available to social partners when it comes to dealing with artificial intelligence. Now, we have 5 speakers, which I'm delighted to introduce to you. First, we'll be hearing from Sandrine Caz, who's Senior Economist at the OECD, leading the work on collective bargaining and social dialogue. She's based in Paris. Good afternoon to you, Sandrine. Secondly, we have Maureen Hick, who's Director of Unieuropa Finance, which is a trade union federation at the European level. She's an expert on framework agreements, and she joins us on the line from Brussels. Good afternoon to you, Maureen. Miriam Pinto Lamena is Head of International Affairs at the Spanish Confederation of Employers and Industries. She's been part of the negotiating team in the latest social dialogue agreements in Spain. Miriam joins us from Madrid, where the temperature is apparently 20 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Lucky Miriam. David Barnes is enjoying breakfast, or has enjoyed breakfast, in Washington, D.C., where it's a little gone 9 a.m. He's Vice President of the Global Workforce Policy at IBM and is overseeing IBM's advocacy on issues including the future of work and the use of AI in employment. A very good morning to you, David. Finally, Christina Kolclough is founder of the Why Not Lab, an advocate for the workers' voice with extensive global labour movement, Brussels. A very warm welcome to all of you. All of you will be invited to take the floor and put your point of view as to where the world of work and the engagement with workers is at this precise moment. Let me begin with you, Sandrine. You've been researching the role of social partners extensively for the last, 4 years or so. What do we know already about their role in the future of work, the technical transitions in particular when it comes to AI?
Well, thank you, Emma, and good afternoon to all. Indeed, we have conducted research at the OECD on social dialogue and collective bargaining on the changing world of work. And what we found is that social partners have really a key role to play in responding to the challenges, but also the opportunities arising from technological changes. Of course, there is no one-size-fits-all model of collective bargaining, and we have documented the granularity of the different collective bargaining systems across OECD countries, as it's an important aspect to understand how the different systems work and how they are shaping labor market outcomes, such as job quality, inequalities, labor market resilience, etc. And an important result of our work is that when social partners work cooperatively, when collective bargaining is based on mutual trust and designed as to strike a balance between inclusiveness and flexibility, then social dialogue can ease workers and companies' technological transitions. So first, for instance, social partners can help firms adopt new technologies and practices, determine and anticipate the associated skills and training needs. And they can do so, if you want, in a more flexible, pragmatic and fine-tuned manner that can be achieved through legislation, as being discussed really at enterprise workplace level and also tailored at this level. But I think beyond adaptation, social dialogue can also mitigate the potential cost or risks of these technological changes. So for instance, social partners can shape the design of new rights. We've seen recent agreements, for instance, collective agreements signed on the right to disconnect or on the work-life balance, for instance, but they can also improve existing rights. For instance, if there are rights to training, they can add additional provisions to these existing rights. Finally, and very importantly, social partners and collective bargaining can complement public policies in strengthening workers' labor market security. There are many examples across OECD countries of social partners providing active support and guidance to displaced workers, such as the famous Swedish job security councils, for instance, but also in enhancing workers' adaptability. For example, there are many collective agreements that guarantee access to trainings. Social partners are very much involved in many countries in funding and managing training programs, etc. So along these lines, social partners have different ways of action, if you want. They can raise their concern, raise their voice. They can also inform and advise their members, their affiliates. They can design and negotiate collective agreements, and they can also ensure monitoring and compliance of agreements or adopted protocols. So regarding AI, in particular AI-related topics, we started to review how social partners were already responding to AI adoption across OECD countries. And we find that they were actually quite active already. So many social partners, for instance, are engaging in outreach and awareness campaigns. They publish guides, they organize workshops, etc., to inform and alert their members. For instance, we have many examples of unions that have expressed concerns about ethical issues, job quality, etc. So they have produced guidelines about the application of AI in the workplace. Also guides about data privacy and data protection. Both employers' organizations and unions are highlighting the need for upskilling and reskilling, the risk of becoming AI literate, etc. Moreover, some unions have also calling already for the introduction of new rights, in particular, for example, rights linked to workplace data and surveillance. What we found, however, is regarding collective agreements, not much was going on, and very few AI-related agreements were actually negotiated and signed. Finally, another interesting result, maybe from that survey we conducted with the social partners, is that they do not too much make use of these new digital and AI-related tools, while this may be potentially an interesting tool to pursue their strategies. And this is why I think I'm very happy to join this conversation today and to hear more about social partners' activities in those two aspects. And I think with that, Emma, I give you the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sandrine. Well, let's hear about the experiences of two representatives from unions and employer organisations, each on how they have navigated their way through collective agreements and how they have incorporated the role of AI into the negotiations. Let's begin with you, Maureen. Tell us about your experience about dealing with framework agreements on AI. And when it comes to trying to deal with them, could you also include where AI fits in terms within the agreement compared with other topics as well?
Absolutely. Thank you, Emma, and hello to everybody joining us today. Just as a brief introduction and background, so I'm coming from Unieuropa Finance. We are representing finance sector workers across Europe, bank, insurance and central banks. We're part of the regional office Unieuropa, which represents 7 million workers in over 270 trade unions across Europe, which is in turn part of Uni Global, the Global Trade Union Federation, representing 20 million private services workers across the world. Unieuropa Finance, as with the other sectors covered by Uni, we are all what we call sectoral social partners at the European level, which means that we meet in social dialogues with the European level employers, banking, insurance, and also the European Central Bank several times a year. And part of the work that we do, it's of course, we want to establish maybe joint campaigns, joint work plans, and what we call joint declarations, which is what I'll be talking about today. Now, actually, these joint declarations are not legally binding. They are not technically collective agreements, but they are a signal of intent at the European level between the trade unions and the employers, committing and engaging on certain issues. And we hope that these agreements, these joint declarations, will then be used as a basis for agreements by our members at the national sectoral company level, using those same commitments and hopefully putting them into collective agreements, negotiating them within their social dialogues. So the one that I've been asked to present today is a recent one that we signed just a little under a year ago in March 2021 in the European Insurance Social Dialogue on artificial intelligence. And I was asked, and you've asked me as well, Emma, if we felt that this negotiating this joint declaration in any way felt different to other ones because of the topic of AI. And I have to honestly say no. I mean, we've negotiated many declarations on a variety of issues, from remote work to diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And I have to say, this one didn't feel any different. We had good and progressive negotiations, also doing them during COVID, which wasn't easy. But I think this was helped also by the growing momentum at the European level on the topic of artificial intelligence. And we had a lot of texts and work that we could base ourselves on, be it the 2019 Commission publication on guidelines for trustworthy AI, the 2020 European Commission white paper on AI. And in fact, we use the definition from this white paper. We've also used it in our joint declaration because we felt it was flexible enough to allow our declaration to be future-proof and not, become immediately outdated when we're talking about these constantly evolving technologies. But it was also precise enough to give us a certain legal clarity and legal certainty, as we hope the declaration will be used to inform collective agreements. And we also used as a base the 2020 European cross-sectoral social partner framework agreement on digitalization, which included a specific chapter on AI. And as this was negotiated already by the European Trade Union Confederation and then Business Europe and the other European employer federations on the other side, it was a useful base for us to say this has already been agreed at a social partner level, so we should also agree it in our insurance joint declaration. So just to go into a few details on the main points that are covered in our insurance joint declaration, first of all, we say that AI, the use of AI, we can't deny that AI will be used in the insurance sector as across many other sectors, but it has to be responsible and it has to be ethical. We acknowledge that it can bring opportunities from the worker point of view in terms of it could help improve working conditions, it can help enhance productivity, it can even help enhance the overall competitiveness of the sector. But we want to be sure that this doesn't come with any negative consequences. So we also have to make sure that those working conditions are protected, that there's no unfair bias or discrimination that comes in with the growing use of AI. Crucially, from the trade union point of view, we've also ensured in the joint declaration that workers and their representatives will have information and consultation rights when AI is introduced in the workplace, and that it should be a topic of social dialogue. So again, there we're talking about those collective agreements to make sure that workers and their unions have a say in when and how these tools are introduced. Another crucial aspect that we managed to get included in the joint declaration was the issue of the human in control. And this again is to ensure that whilst AI can be a useful tool, and it should be used to enhance human abilities, not replace them, and that oversight must always remain with a human and not with a robot. We've also got aspects in there about, I mentioned transparency and the ethics, ensuring that data rights are protected, be they workers' data, but also the data of the customers that the insurance sector would be dealing with. And at the European level, we reference the EU GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation as well. And lastly, talking specifically about those worker rights, and I know Sandrine also mentioned it, is that importance of making sure that workers have access to the right training, upskilling, reskilling to be able to use these new tools, to be able to carry out these jobs in a world of work that is evolving with more and more technology. And for those who maybe will see their job replaced or they're not able to do it anymore because of AI, to ensure a just transition and that they have access to career development to make sure that no worker is left behind. I just wanted to add in the last minute that remains, just to say that the Insurance Social Dialogue was not the first to negotiate a joint declaration on AI. We were actually just pipped to the post by our fellow uni sector. We also represent the telecom sector, and they also signed a very similar joint declaration in December of 2020, so just a few months before us. So again, there is growing momentum also within the various European sectors and the various European social dialogues. And just to conclude, to say we also have a Unieuropa cross-sectoral position, which we published already in 2019, which also acts as a base for our work on this. And again, our key points are, from the trade union point of view, making sure that workers are at the center, workers and trade unions are at the center of deciding how these tools are implemented, that they're part of collective agreements, that they have a key role in ensuring that there's full transparency and ethics in how they're used, and that workers have the right opportunity to get the right skills to continue in these jobs in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Maureen. Let's take another view as well. I mean, Maureen obviously saying that this is all AI just becomes part and parcel of the negotiating project. Let's go to you, Miriam, in Madrid to give us your experience of a situation in a different context. I mean, you were involved in the apartheid of agreement in Spain that was trying to ensure algorithmic transparency to gig workers, an increasingly important issue. What were the challenges with AI, and did you find that they were very different in terms of how you negotiated the issues?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Emma. Good afternoon, everyone. Congratulations to the OECD for the organization of this very interesting conference, and thanks very much for inviting us to participate. I'll go straight to the point of your question, but first let me take this opportunity to say that social dialogue is one of the most valuable tools that we have to reach agreements that will be more effective, more stable, and more lasting over time, as it has been demonstrated during this international pandemic. During 2020 and 2021, we have reached in Spain more than 12 agreements, 6 social agreements for the defense of employment, a new regulation of distance working, an agreement to promote our care system for dependent people, negotiations on pay transparency and equality plans, and the first agreement to guarantee the sustainability for pension system. Well, about all these agreements, I can say that the agreements on digital platforms, together with the new labor reform that recently has been approved, without any doubt, stands out for the extraordinary complexity. Why? Because in our agreement on digital platforms, we addressed 2 main issues that modify our workers' statute. First, the presumption of employment of delivery platform workers, And second, the right of the works councils to be informed by the company of the parameters, the rules, instructions on which algorithms or artificial intelligence systems are based that affect decision-making, that may have an impact on working conditions and access to and maintenance of employment, including profiling. The debate about the presumption of employment was quite challenging because we were dealing with a reality to which many thousands of workers were linked through the 4 big companies operating in our country, who, by the way, were our members, because the debate directly affected to the heart of the labor law and what is a labor relationship or not. And because it was a high-profile media issue that put a lot of pressure on the negotiation. In addition to these many sides of this debate, in the specific case of the delivery workers of these platforms, something was happening that, from our point of view, was not tolerable. And that is that technologies cannot be used as an excuse to the value of the working conditions of workers. The line that distinguishes an employee from a self-employed worker is sometimes very thin, but what is not thin is the fulfillment of certain working conditions, health and safety conditions, and social security. So my organization understood that a precariousness effect was taking place and was not justified because these delivery workers were being subjected to models of organization and working relations that, in our opinion, were not adequate in accordance with our labor legislation and in accordance to the last Supreme Court ruling. So we also understood that this model could spread to other sectors, damaging self-employed as a whole and other sectors, and that we had to assume our responsibility and reach an agreement limited to the regulation of this group of delivery workers. In the negotiations about artificial intelligence, our position from the very beginning was not to deny the reality, but to find solutions to prevent potential damage. We are firmly convinced that artificial intelligence systems and solutions have the potential to increase the productivity of the enterprise, the well-being of the workforce, and a better allocation of tasks. But it is also important to make sure that they do not jeopardize but increase human involvement and capacity as work. It is a reality that these technologies are intervening in contracting, in selection processes. Sometimes there is artificial intelligence in promotion procedures, and there are also algorithmic calculations and mathematical formula when it comes to calculating workers' compensation and departures. So our responsibility was to safeguard principles of transparency of artificial intelligence when have an impact on working conditions. And we agreed to take it to the Workers' Statute as a right of the work councils to be informed and affecting to all companies, not only platform workers. Only if workers' legal representatives are familiar with human instructions that go beyond algorithms, they will be able to defend the interests of the workers. Of course, one of the main concerns of the companies is to reveal their private codes, but the principle of algorithmic transparency is not about revealing codes. It's about making the parameters and criteria of the decisions that are taken intelligible and making human intervention possible at all times. On the other hand, this duty of algorithmic transparency was certainly not new. In the sense that many reports and opinions from European bodies like European Parliament or the European Economic and Social Council or the European Commission agree that the use of artificial intelligence should be governed. So to conclude, this agreement reached is of extraordinary value because it is pioneering and including in the Workers' Statute two of the issues that are currently being debated in Europe. And most importantly, because this agreement is the result of social dialogue, which is key to promoting agreements that are more effective in their implementation and more durable over time. Thank you very much, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Miriam. So listening to the difficulties and the very human problems that are being faced by people trying to negotiate these, it shows that this is navigable and negotiable, but it is also extremely new. It's such a charged topic as well, and so many social partners are finding it part of the bargaining process for the very, very first time. So let's see how social partners can address AI issues beyond just bargaining. Let's hear now from David Barnes. David, IBM is pioneering in its development of AI tools in the workplace. How do social partners use these tools to help businesses and their workers when we're all trying to adopt a brand new path?
Thanks, Emma. You mentioned new, and it's probably fair to say that the actual adoption of AI by social partners is really not advancing as quickly as it is in business enterprises. But our friends at the OECD mentioned to me an academic case study of worker organizations, a US alt labor network and a diversified traditional trade union in Australia that deployed an IBM Watson AI chatbot. Now, those organizations made the connection, like most businesses do, that AI's value is not in cost cutting, but in growth. They actually saw that an AI-powered chatbot could not only help better answer their members' questions, but actually improve their ability to organize and to activate their members. They did consider alternatives like some of the well-known social media platforms, but they were evaluated as ill-suited to worker organizing, given problems of control, confidentiality, and vulnerability, among others. The union's chatbot really became a means for member engagement and to begin conversations rather than just simply answering questions. It also became the means to identify issues as catalysts for worker organizing conversations and for mapping the intensity of those issues across different work sites. And for framing those issues and creating a context for workers in that engagement. But perhaps more valuable for social partners is probably the data generated by the chatbot interactions, because that data can be exposed to other Watson AI and analytics programs and can be used to infer climate in the workplace and to measure worker sentiment and to identify trends. Those analytics also improve personalized outreach to individual workers or to specified groups of workers. Now, obviously, employer federations can deploy those same AI tools for their member engagement and sentiment analysis to focus their outreach efforts and policy programs. And look, there are already many AI systems used in business that can be applied in social partner contexts, like AI-driven personalized learning platforms for which you can apply for sector training programs and labor demand forecasting systems. But I really want to talk about tools that I see as essential for social partners to make a commitment to ethical AI implementation. And Miriam made reference to this earlier, because ethics is more than a box to check. Social partners have a special responsibility, I think, to foster trust and to ensure the technology is designed and used responsibly. Our experience is that a culture of transparency is perhaps the most important foundation for AI ethics. We don't believe we have all the answers, and ethics is a journey on which it's best to be quite humble. The key pillars of ethics for AI are obviously explainability, transparency, fairness, robustness, and privacy. And we've used our experience with AI to develop tools and services to help reinforce those pillars. And these tools are available for use by social partners. And they're the kinds of tools that should be adopted by larger social partner organizations implementing AI, or made a prerequisite, frankly, for any social partner's procurement from a technology vendor. There are 3 open source toolkits which IBM donated to the Linux Foundation and that you can freely access from our website. AI Explainability 360 has 8 algorithms and proxy metrics for explainability to make machine learning models more understandable for users. To mitigate discrimination and bias, we have AI Fairness 360, which includes 10 bias mitigation algorithms and more than 70 fairness metrics to test for bias. Another tool called Adversarial Robustness 360 evaluates the AI models for robustness against attacks and allows developers to create and replicate attacks and defense methods for the algorithms. So social partners can also improve transparency for their AI by using our fact sheets tool. And fact sheets are somewhat analogous to a food nutrition label. They help users to better understand how the AI was created and to determine if it's appropriate for their use. Now, these fact sheets are tailored to the particular AI model or service and to the needs of their target audience or consumer, so they can vary in content and format depending on the user audience. We've also developed what we call an uncertainty quantification toolkit that basically encourages that intellectual humility I talked about and prevents people getting overconfidence by providing measures of the uncertainty of the AI forecasts or recommendations. For example, social partners could review data on salary increases in a territory or a sector and develop forecasts of likely changes, but also know there's the specific margin of error and the percentage confidence level of the forecasts. We also offer commercially a cloud-based platform that provides data and AI services to automatically monitor and manage AI models. But let me make a final point. Technology and tools can't solve or prevent every problem. In addition to a good dose of humility, social partners should introduce and implement rigorous AI governance. In fact, governance ought to come before the tools. For IBM, governance is sophisticated. We have an AI ethics board that can stop development or withdraw a product if it is not trustworthy. The tools won't help unless someone or some group in the organization can say, no, you have to stop and fix this. We also adopt AI ethics by design and privacy by design methodologies. So you do that work up front in designing these tools in our AI development and implementation services. And we do extensive employee training on AI ethics. And this helps stop you constantly being in fixing problems later on in the cycle of implementation. So in net, these tools can help social partners address many problems and prevent problems, but governance really matters.
Very much indeed, David. And would I be cheeky to say that other toolkits are available to us from other companies, but absolutely fine. Thank you very much indeed for that, David. It is reassuring to know that companies like IBM are taking these issues incredibly seriously. They are really big companies though. So what can be done not only to detect bias, it's something that we've just discussed extensively this week, but also to address what's this perceived data asymmetry between workers and businesses, which can be exacerbated by AI. There is that feeling, isn't there, that if you are a worker, that perhaps you are entering into a bargain where what is happening within the company you might not be fully aware of, or you might not fully understand. So let me bring in Christina Colclough now. I mean, you've been involved in the developments of apps and helping workers to gather their own data and decide what to share. I mean, how does that work, Christina, and how does it work, and what uses does it have for unions, for an example, bargaining processes?
Thank you, Emma, and it's a thrill to be the last speaker to hear all of these very interesting talks. I could comment a lot on the governance and so forth, but let me stick to the very important issue, Emma, that you raised on the data asymmetry, which essentially is a power asymmetry. Those who have the data have the information, and also then the grounds on which to create the narrative, the story, the lived experience. So what we did was try to find a way not to increase the surveillance of workers, but instead to give them control over some of the data that is already being extracted from their mobile devices. So the tool we developed is called WeClock. It's on Android, it's on iOS, Apple Watch as well. And what it does is it goes in and takes over the control of some of the 14 sensors you have inside your mobile phone. Now, I don't know if many of you actually realize there's 14 sensors in your mobile phone, but there are. And what WeClock does then is gives you a reading from all of those sensors. So, for example, in a workplace setting, wage theft is the largest crime against workers across the world. So here we can say, well, let me be able to prove beyond doubt what my actual working time was on location. When did I get to the physical location of work? When did I leave? How much time was there between my shifts, etc. You can also have a situation where workers don't get enough breaks. So the movement center inside your cell phone will be able to say, workers who are usually on their feet, are they ever getting a chance to sit down and sit still for a minute? And then you can have workers who are out there on the field, home care workers. We had a case in New Zealand where they were only paid for certain mileage a day, and everything that they were driving beyond that, they were not covered for. Well, using WeClock, they could actually prove how much that they were driving and therefore get proper compensation. But one of the things that you've all kind of been talking about, and I just want to say, Miriam, I totally salute the Spanish AI Act. It really touches on so many of the important issues of transparency, of knowing the instructions to the algorithm and so forth. But one of the key things you also all have mentioned in various ways is how do we ensure we humans are in control of this? How do we really take care of the well-being of workers? And here WeClock again can go in and give workers, not just on an individual basis, but on a collective basis, you know, are people sleeping long enough, or what is their working time, to really promote that awareness around the conditions of work. So WeClock, as I said, is open source. We have nothing, no stakes in there. There's no third-party data access. So the unions, the worker collectives using it really in that way get to see some undeniable proof of the particular issues that they want to measure. Now, I want to add a little curiosity to all of this, because ideally WeClock wouldn't need to exist. You know, we don't want to add to the datification of work and workers. We don't want to add to the commodification that's going on. But we also realize that in the interim, until we get to a more healthy form of digitalization, we need to balance out this power asymmetry, this information asymmetry. So we have lots of unions who are testing it. We keep on developing it as we go along. But I think it's very important that, number one, and I know, and I'm looking now at David, you know, Watson is a very expensive tool. How do we take some of the good abilities of digital technologies and actually allow the majority of workers, small unions, small companies, NGOs to benefit from them, but responsibly? So that was the aim of WeClock.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Christine. Let's open up the debate a little bit so that everybody can start talking about a few of the things that we've heard. And that includes you, if you're watching, if you're not part of the panel, but if you do have a question, please do get in touch. The chat function on the side of your screen at the right-hand side should give you ample opportunity to do so. These people are here for you for the next 20 minutes, so do explore their brains if you can. Just tell us who you are, where you're from, and to whom your question is directed. But one thing I think I would want to start off is by talking to both Maureen and Miriam. Maybe to you, Maureen, first. We've heard in the latter half of this panel the idea of workers and employers not necessarily being at odds, but AI being a potential area for friction, of imbalance. Where is it when you were doing your negotiations for your agreements? Did you and did the employer and the workers' unions actually find some sort of common ground when it came to navigating AI? Maureen first, and then I'll same question to Miriam.
Absolutely. Thanks, Emma. I mean, as I said, the negotiations weren't too full of friction. You know, they did go well. But one aspect that we found was difficult to negotiate was, as we've been talking throughout the session today, that human in control principle. And I think as much as we could agree that AI does have benefits, be it to, you know, workers' conditions from the point of view of the trade unions and the productivity and competitiveness from the employer's point of view, it was quite difficult for us to fight. And I mean, we did get it in the end, to make sure that workers remain in control, that, you know, these tools, however beneficial they can be, you know, can we trust them? So I think as much as, you know, we were all in agreement that the trust and the ethics and the responsibility is needed, there was perhaps more of a reliance from the employer point of view on, well, these tools are fine, you know, as long as, and we're not even talking about who's created them. I mean, of course, in the insurance industry, we would just be using tools that are provided obviously from other AI creators. So, you know, again, there's that ethical element. So these were some of the things that that proved a little bit difficult. And also for us, it was kind of the duality of negotiating on wanting to make sure workers were using responsible AI in terms of their interface with the customers, but also in terms of how AI would be impacting them as the workforce. And again, we had a little bit of friction in terms of the AI in HR procedures, recruitment and career development and that kind of thing. So yeah, still some work to go, but we got there.
Miriam, thank you for that, Maureen. Miriam, where were the areas where employers and employees and unions actually agreed on in terms of what needed to be addressed when it came to negotiating the AI issues?
Yeah, well, as I said, it was not easy at all. But at the end, I think trade unions and business organizations took our responsibility role to agree these points that I mentioned, and that in fact are in a law, in a rider law. So I mean, it's not just an agreement of the social partners, but it is implemented, has been implemented by a law. I have to say that in Spain we have more than 90% of very small companies. So every time we reach an agreement, every time we short the distance between trade unions and companies, we are helping companies and workers for companies to fulfill all the laws and for workers to protect all the rights. So it's not only a question about regulation of the government, it's about the agreements of social partners, but it is also more about the collective bargaining that it was mentioned at the beginning of the session. Most of the regulations that we have agreed in this last year, we leave room for that collective bargaining, because it is in fact in the sectors where they have to land the measures and to design how are they going to adapt them to their own activity and to their own companies, because every sector is completely different. I have to say, sorry, just 1 second, I'm quite proud of the agreement we reached. So, and I think that all and we are helping all the companies and very small companies to understand what artificial intelligence is and they manage in the best way. Thank you.
No, thank you very much indeed for that, Miriam. Christina, you raised your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Just I want to throw a little provocative thing in here. It is quite astonishing, actually, that the only constant in all of our conversation here is the technology. And it's us having to adapt and learn things vis-a-vis it. And I really want to throw into the sort of discussion that we now and again also dare say, do we really need this technology? Is it really increasing productivity, efficiency? You know, the OECD's growth, or rather the decline in the growth of labor productivity, is quite astonishing. So let's not fall for the technological determinism. Let's really now and again dare to say we should have a right to be without all of this. So that was one thing. And the second little thing that I just want to sort of again throw into the center of the room is, you have all talked about ethics. Now, ethics are inherently political. Your ethics are not necessarily better than mine, or the other way around. What we do have, though, across the OECD countries is the commitment to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I would very much encourage everybody to put this into human rights perspective. These rights are absolute. And then focus on the right of autonomy, the right of freedom, and ultimately the right to be free from manipulation. And I think the more you understand the power of algorithmic systems, the more you understand how manipulative these can be. So just throwing two thoughts in there. Thanks, Emma.
David, let's throw you in at the deep end with this one. I mean, here's Christina saying, do we need all of this, really, in every single situation, or can we just muddle along as human beings? But secondly, there is that issue of disparity, isn't there? I mean, yes, we're talking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but even when you step down and you go into individual nations, and you have certain nations which are much more unionized than others, and certain governments which take an incredibly light touch when it comes to relationships with unions, and many don't even recognize them. How, when you're at somewhere like IBM, do you say, well, okay, well, this might work in the United States, but it's not going to work in France?
Yeah, that's a really important point, Emma. And look, when we talk about human rights, obviously those human rights inform how we kind of try and contextualize and demonstrate AI ethics, whether it's privacy, whether it's transparency, so people understand that they're dealing with AI and how it's working and why it's producing the results that it does. But look, we're a global company. We take a global perspective on implementation and development of AI, and how we do it in the United States. There's no different to that process, that behavior, than there is in Latin America or in Africa or anywhere else. So the only difference is where governments regulate or mandate in a particular way, well, then obviously we follow those regulations or mandates, but the base set of principles we adopt and the behaviors we adopt are globally consistent. I'd also say, just to clear up a point earlier, many of those tools for AI ethics I mentioned earlier are open source. They're free on our website. Anyone can go get them. So, they're it's not like we're trying to sell a product there. We're trying to further people's adoption of the principle, because that can only be good for acceptance of AI and trust in AI. And also, Christina, I think, mentioned that Watson's expensive. Well, no, it's not. You can build your own chatbot on our website and go use it for nothing. It's free. And you can add on services which then cost money. But that's why those unions went and used that Watson technology, because it was low cost and it did something that they couldn't do. And that's the answer to the question, do we really need this? And the unions said, yeah, we need this, and we can make good use of it in organizing our workers.
We do have that lucky situation, and the likes of IBM is offering to the world something which would help us navigate all these different and complicated channels. Maureen, when you look at what is happening in the European Union and you have the EU.AI Act, that is an enormous step being taken by the member states to impose some sort of regulation and to recognize the high risk elements of all this. What difficulties do you see in them trying to impose regulation when we have the likes of IBM who are going off and setting some guarantees by themselves? Can you see some areas of conflict here?
Absolutely. And I mean, the AI, the work that the European Union is doing on AI, let's say, this was based on its previous work on the GDPR, on the data protection, it all comes together. And, potentially that could have gone further as well. Obviously, when you're negotiating between 27 different governments, it's not always easy. And as we've said in today's session as well, you might have your kind of umbrella ethics and that you want to be covered in terms of the human human rights, but then how do you adapt it to each sector, each workplace will have different needs and different situations. So this is where, again, it's vital to have the trade unions and the social partners involved. We're the ones who know best at that kind of the company sectoral level how to make sure these are implemented in a way that that protects and that can enhance. I mean, going forward, we'll have to see how this can be. I think it is important to have European-wide rules, but as you say, much of this technology is not necessarily being created in Europe. If we're talking about where the data is being stored, for example, that's not necessarily in Europe. So European or EU rules can only go so far as well. And many of companies like IBM are obviously active around the world, including in Europe. So how can we bring these companies to the table and bring the creators, as Christina said, the developers of AI to the table, to make sure that we're all on the same page. And I think these are the elements that we will be looking at. And of course, the European Union will be should have an important role to play, but as well as the social partners on the ground.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Maureen. Let's go to you, Sandrine. We've had a question in from Igama, who's from the Ministry of Justice of Burkina Faso. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on this on this panel. It's a very simple question. Do social partners see AI as a danger or an opportunity for employment? I mean, we've read an awful lot about how artificial intelligence is incredibly helpful for matching workers who are highly skilled, and yet it can actively become an exclusion system for those who are less skilled. What's your view on this?
Thank you, Emma. Well, I think indeed when we conducted this survey to social partners, asking, what do you see as like fears and opportunities? Of course, the risk of job losses, came also, as often, technological changes, there is this fear of job destruction. But we have also to think in terms of job creation at the same time. So I think what came out from this survey is that actually, while job losses was an important concern rated by social partners, all the different aspects, for instance, the risk of health and safety issues, the ethical issues, the liability risks. All these ethical risks, all concerns, and I think something that was said also in the discussion, because I think what comes a little bit the elephant in the room, if I may speak so, because we are very much discussing now, we highlighted the importance of social dialogue and collective bargaining in easing transition, in facilitating technological transition. But we also have evidence in our work about the importance of collective bargaining and social dialogue in fostering inclusive labor markets, in enhancing job quality, in reducing labor market inequalities, in sharing productivity gains more equally, etc. So I think it's not because we are now highlighting this particular aspect of adapting to these changes, changing world of work, that the other part is of course not there. And I think it was mentioned a couple of times that with AI, indeed, there is a risk of increased power imbalance, right? And this is, I think, to me, all this discussion is very much highlighting and outlining the importance of collective bargaining and social dialogue, precisely to correct this type of imbalance, to ease the transitions, to highlight the importance of negotiating, of reaching consensus. I think that's also what I take from this discussion, listening to the colleagues.
I'll come to you in a minute, Christina, where you want to talk. But Miriam, I want to ask a question indeed here about what if you're not part of a union? The world turned very much into an area of gig workers who jump from job to job to job, especially post-COVID, and lots of people who were not part of a secure labour system found themselves extremely exposed. What's your view on this one, given the fact that you have actually bargained and engaged in negotiations for the gig economy?
Sorry, Emma, I don't know if I'm not sure if I understood, sorry.
We've been talking here about people who are part of social partners, and there's a lot of ideas of, workers working together and working together with enterprises. But what if you are not part of a union? How protected should you feel?
In Spain, it's completely different situation, and I think in every member state can be, because in Spain, the collective bargainings cover all the workers, even if they are or not affiliated to the trade union. So every agreement reached by social partners and every collective bargaining that we sign with the trade unions affect to all the companies of that sector. So every worker is included in that collective bargaining. So every worker is protected by everything that we negotiate.
Christine, thank you very much indeed for that, Miriam, for clearing that up for us. Christina, you raised your hand a moment ago. Just if you wouldn't mind making your point fairly briefly, because we have to get the closing words from Sandrine in a minute.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was just a question really on the skills side of things, because there is a very, very dangerous tendency to reduce a lot of the discussions of the digitalization of work to one of skills. And I would just say, in relation to sort of the entire world, if we take a global view on this, that there's no social, economic, biological system that has survived without a diversity of skills and competencies. So this over fetishism, I can never say that word, on STEM, for example, is very, very dangerous. And I would really urge us all to remember to really embrace the diversity of skills and competencies of all jobs on all levels, and to ensure that AI doesn't, as somebody said before, narrow our labour markets.
Christina, thank you very much indeed. Let me hand over finally to Sandrine Caz to give us our final summary of what your takeaways are from the last hour. Thank you, Sandrine.
Thank you, Emma. Well, I think I started a little bit in highlighting, to me, what I thought was really like emphasizing the importance of collective bargaining and social dialogue. But I think that also what come across quite clearly also is that social partners are already adjusting to this AI transition. They are very eager to shape these AI transitions and have already well-existing tools. I think to me it's important to flag the fact that a lot of instruments are already in place, that we have to reinvent everything. There are collective agreements, there are well-functioning tools already that may be used to ensure this smooth transition. However, I think the topic, AI remains, you said, a black box. I think during the week there was discussion. It's a complex issue, and I think it's important that social partners have the capacity to the knowledge on AI to fully understand how AI works, to exchange also with other social partners and respond to the different initiatives. And I think another important challenge here as well, which is not only posed by AI, by the way, is the question of inclusiveness, that is, of having broad-based social partners that can represent all actors, including the emerging ones, right? Like platform workers, gig workers, make sure that everyone has a seat at the table. You already asked Emma about, covering a maximum of workers. So ensuring this sort of broad coverage, while at the same time maintaining some flexibility at firm level, because we have not to undermine the economic prospects, for instance, of vulnerable or small firms. I think it's very important. Maybe a final word on, you asked me about the forthcoming OECD research. So we're going to continue and explore the sort of interlinked relationship between, let's say, AI and social dialogue. That is clearly, on the one hand, what we try to highlight today, how social partners, collective bargaining are responding to these challenges and opportunities posed by AI, doing also a little bit of research, because we, at the OECD, we came up with a bit of taxonomy of the different collective bargaining systems, but also of the different voice representation at the workplace. So we would like to see whether we can link this with particular outcomes. But also we want to look at the other way around, how AI is also potentially putting pressure, additional pressure on social dialogue, on labor relation systems themselves. So that all the results of this work will be published in a reports that we will release in the coming months. And I think having this type of exchange and conversation as we had today was really important and useful. And I would like really to thank all our participants and discussant for this conversation this afternoon. And also give it back to you, Emma. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Sandrine. And thank you to all today's panelists. That brings us to the end of our allocated time. Thank you for watching, and thank you to Sandrine Caz, Senior Economist at the OECD, Maureen Hick, Director of Unieuropa Finance, Mariam Pinto-Lomenia, Head of International Affairs at the Spanish Confederation of Employers and Industries, David Barnes, Vice President, Global Workforce Policy at IBM, and Christina Colclough, founder of the Why Not Lab. Thank you for taking part and for sharing such diverse and in fact very interesting thoughts. If you are interested in the next 15 minutes, the next session will be starting. It's on the impact of AI on business dynamics and competition. Well worth sticking around for that. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye, and thank you very much for taking part in today's panel.